You start by saying that the doctrine of the Trinity is understood to assert that God is one ousia subsisting in three hypostases. But what does
Hmm.
this mean, indeed?
Yeah, that's
If,
the $1 million question.
so then you start considering some of the options, and you say a hypostasis is a concrete instance of a particular sort of nature. Thus, the doctrine of the Trinity would appear to be asserting that God is a single nature in three concrete instances, but that would seem to mean that there are three gods. Why don't we unpack that concern a little bit? Just for the person who's not educated in philosophy, tell us what a nature is and what an instance of a nature is, and give us some examples.
This is a complicated question because there are two ways of talking about natures historically. One way is to think of natures as these abstract, sort of ideal realities that are intrinsically general and can be instantiated by multiple objects.
Mm-hmm.
And another way of thinking about them is as concrete particular entities. So think, for example, if you write the letter A on a piece of paper 3 times, how many letters are there on that piece of paper? In one sense, there are 3 letters because you have the letter A written 3 times. And in another sense, there's only one letter because you have 3 instances of the letter A.
Mm-hmm.
So from the point of view of the general, there's only one letter there, right? There's the letter A, this sort of generic, general, ideal reality of the letter A. From the point of view of the particular and the concrete, there are 3 letters there because you have this A, that A, and then the other A. So when we talk about natures, also we can think, okay, if you have 3 dogs, how many animals are there in the room? Well, in one sense, there are 3 animals because you have three, concrete natures, so to speak. In another sense, there's only one animal because you have 3 instances of the dog nature. So depending on the interpretation of nature in the Trinitarian doctrine, you can differ, right? You come up with different explanations of things. And this ambiguity about whether it's meant abstractly or concretely influences how people interpret the doctrine of the Trinity.
Yeah. So then you continue in this thought in your next tweet. You say, consider how we could say of three human beings that they are a single ousia, human nature, in three hypostases, three instances. If this is how the terms are understood in the doctrine of the Trinity, then it turns out to be tritheism. There would be three gods.
Exactly.
It's the old distinction between first ousia and second ousia from Aristotle, right? That a
Correct.
nature could mean, or a substance equally could mean a thing of a certain kind, or it could mean kind of the kind. So that which makes an individual a thing of a certain kind. So human nature, in one sense, you and I would be human natures. In the other sense, human nature is what makes you a human being and what makes me a human being. Switch to the divine case. Divine nature is just whatever it is that makes it the owner a god. When you got three different things, each of them have everything it takes to be a god. Yeah, looks like you got three gods. I mean, in my view, this is the problem that bedeviled Basil of Caesarea toward the end
Yeah,
of
and
his
you
life.
have even contemporary theologians who propose something like this. You have the so-called social Trinitarians
Mm-hmm.
like Miroslav Volf and Jürgen Moltmann and Cornelius Plantinga Jr. and others. Really what they're saying, and Richard Swinburne too, really it seems to me what they're saying is that there are three gods. You have three distinct beings, three distinct things, that all instantiate the same nature. Then you have three gods, and there's not really a way of getting around.
That doesn't look like a promising route to go down. So then you have another alternative here in your big tweet storm here. You say, the way out of this problem is to assert that the three hypostases share a single concrete ousia, essence, nature, substance, rather than understanding the ousia as an abstract universal. But then the doctrine asserts that God is three instances of a single concrete nature, three things and one thing. This is naturally a contradiction since you cannot have three instances of a single concrete thing. You can write the letter A 3 times on a piece of paper, but that's three instances of an abstract thing. You cannot have the same concrete thing 3 times over. Help us understand this other move where the nature is concrete and not abstract.
Yeah, the difficulty with this move is that if you think about ousia concretely, it almost becomes a synonym with hypostasis. If an ousia is a concrete instance of a nature, well, that's exactly how they define hypostasis in the tradition, a concrete instance of a particular kind of nature, namely a rational nature, if you want to translate hypostasis as person. So you have one ousia, one concrete nature, and three subsistent instances of that concrete nature. Well, I mean, this is basically saying that you have one thing and three things at the same time, because ousia, interpreted concretely, like I said, is synonymous with hypostasis. The primary substance for Aristotle, the concrete existing thing, is exactly an hypostasis in this later language, a concrete existing thing of a certain nature. And you find this dialectic in John of Damascus. If you read, for example, John of Damascus's treatise on heresies, he goes through all the heresies that he can think of. Some of them are even invented. And by the end, he has a discussion about the Trinity. And he says very nicely at the end of the whole discussion, do not ask how the Trinity is Trinity, for the Trinity is inscrutable. Well, that's because of the way that he defines his terms. He eventually ends up saying that the Trinity is a single divine nature in three concrete instances. But he means a single concrete nature in three instances. Well, how do you have that? Because an instance is exactly a concrete nature. This, I think, is where the more classical understanding of the Trinity that you find in John of Damascus and his predecessors, I think most of them are probably trying to say this, that you have a single concrete nature that subsists in three instances, but that doesn't make any sense.
Because concrete natures are not supposed to be repeatable or to have multiple they don't have instances at all. They are instances.
Exactly, correct.